They thought they had broken me when they threw my battered suitcase out of the Sterling estate gates into the pouring rain. Inside, my sister was raising a glass of champagne to her $55 million inheritance. But they did not know that what they actually handed her was not a fortune, but a time bomb wrapped in gold. 11 months later, standing on the windy docks, I am ready to detonate it and watch their empire crumble. My name is Elena Vance, although on that night, I was still just the invisible shadow in the dazzling light of the Sterling Empire. I stood in the corner of the grand ballroom, clutching a glass of lukewarm water because I could not afford the vintage wine the waiters were circulating. The ocean breeze swept through the open French doors of the Sterling mansion, carrying the scent of salt and money. Everyone around me wore silk and velvet, their laughter ringing like crystal bells against the marble floors. I pulled at the hem of my off-the-rack polyester blazer, trying to cover the fraying thread on my sleeve. I looked like the help, but even the help were paid to be there. I was just the daughter who never measured up. The music swelled, signaling the main event. My parents, Richard and Victoria Sterling, descended the spiral staircase. They looked like royalty, draped in gold and arrogance. Behind them came Isabella, my sister. She floated down the steps in a custom white gown that probably cost more than my entire college tuition. She was the princess, the golden child, the perfect reflection of their vanity. I watched as Richard tapped a silver spoon against his champagne flute, silencing the room. Tonight is about legacy. My father boomed, his voice projecting with the confidence of a man who owned half of Seattle's shipping routes. Victoria and I have made a decision to ensure the future of our family. We are gifting the entirety of the Sterling Trust to Isabella upon her marriage. $55 million to start her new life. The room erupted in applause. I felt the blood drain from my face. My knees buckled, and I grabbed the edge of a table to steady myself. The entire trust, that money was supposed to be divided. It was the safety net I had been promised since birth. I pushed through the crowd, ignoring the annoyed glares of the guests. I reached my parents just as they were clinking glasses with Isabella's fiancé. "Dad, wait. Please," I stammered, my voice trembling. "You said. You told me that trust was for both of us. 55 million. That's everything." Richard looked at me with eyes as cold as the Atlantic. He did not even blink. Victoria stepped forward, her smile fixed for the cameras, but her eyes bored into mine. "Elena, look at you," Victoria whispered, her voice a venomous hiss disguised as a motherly tone. "You are wearing a $40 suit to the event of the season. You have no ambition. You have no style. You are an embarrassment. But, Mom, I'm your daughter," I choked out, tears stinging my eyes. I have nowhere else to go." "Then go somewhere else," Richard said flatly. He snapped his fingers, and the head of security appeared, holding a battered, scuffed leather suitcase. It was mine from my freshman year of college. "We packed your things, the essentials. Do not make a scene, or I will have security drag you out. Leave, now." I stared at the suitcase. They had planned this. This was not a decision made tonight. It was an execution, numbly. I took the handle. I turned and walked toward the grand entrance, feeling hundreds of eyes burning into my back. I reached the valet stand, fumbling for my keys, desperate to just get into my car and drive until the gas ran out. The valet, a man I had known for 5 years, looked down at his shoes. "I'm sorry. Miss Elena, Mr. Sterling instructed us to retain the vehicle. It is company property. He took the car," I whispered. "But how am I supposed to leave?" The valet said nothing. He just pointed toward the iron gates. I walked. The moment I stepped past the security checkpoint, the heavy Seattle clouds broke open, The rain did not just fall, it hammered down, soaking my cheap suit in seconds. I dragged the heavy suitcase through the mud along the shoulder of the highway, my heels sinking into the wet earth with every step. I turned back once. The mansion glowed on the hill, warm and golden, a fortress of wealth that had just ejected me like a virus. It took me 3 hours to walk to the public ferry terminal. My feet were blistered and bleeding. I sat on a hard plastic bench, shivering uncontrollably. I pulled out my phone to check my bank account, hoping to book a motel room. Access denied. I tried my credit card at the vending machine for a bottle of water. Declined. I dug into my pockets, my wet hands shaking so hard I dropped the coins. I counted it out on the dirty floor. $48. That was my net worth. Is this really it? I asked the empty air, my voice cracking. After everything, they just erased me. I curled up on the bench, hugging my knees to my chest to preserve body warmth. The janitor mopped the floor around me, looking at me with a mix of pity and disgust. I closed my eyes, listening to the rain lash against the terminal windows. I did not cry. The tears had frozen inside me during that long walk in the dark. I gripped the handle of my suitcase until my knuckles turned white. I would not go back. I would not beg. I would sleep on this bench. And if I survived the night, the Elena Sterling they knew would be dead. I woke up to the sound of a foghorn blasting through the thin walls of the ferry terminal. My neck screamed in protest, locked in a spasm from sleeping on the hard wooden bench. The air smelled of diesel fumes, rotting seaweed, and stale coffee. This was not the Seattle of glass skyscrapers and tech billionaires. This was the underbelly, the gray industrial purgatory where the city sweated and bled to keep the lights on for people like my parents. My stomach twisted with a hunger so sharp it felt like a physical blow. I had $48 to my name. I bought a cheap coffee and a dry bagel, leaving me with barely enough to survive the week if I did not find income immediately. I wandered into the warehouse district, a maze of rusted corrugated metal and forklifts. A hand-painted sign on a loading dock read, "Day laborers wanted, cash pay." I walked in. The foreman, a man with grease under his fingernails and a belly that strained against his flannel shirt, looked me up and down with a sneer. "We ain't hiring secretaries, sweetheart," he spat, turning back to his clipboard. "This is heavy lifting. Go find a nail salon." I can lift," I said, my voice raspy from the cold. "I need the money. Please, just give me a chance." He laughed, a wet, hacking sound. "Fine, $10 an hour. You move those crates to the staging area. If you break a nail, don't come crying to me." For the next 4 hours, I hauled crates of frozen fish until my arms shook and my hands were raw. The other workers, men with tattoos and scars, whistled and made crude jokes every time I bent down. I gritted my teeth and kept moving. I was not Elena Sterling here. I was just meat for the grinder. Around noon, shouting erupted near the loading bay. A truck driver was screaming at the foreman, waving a sheaf of crumpled papers. "I ain't moving this truck until the paperwork clears." The driver yelled, "Customs rejected the manifest. I'm losing money sitting here. I don't know what to tell you." "Pal," the foreman shouted back, sweating profusely. "The system says it's invalid." I wiped the sweat from my forehead and walked over. I snatched the clipboard from the foreman's hand before he could protest. I scanned the document. It was a standard bill of lading, but the HS codes were outdated. You have the wrong tariff classification," I said, my breath catching in my throat as I pointed to the line item. "This is classified as raw textile, but it's processed. You need to file it under Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the Import Code, if you change this digit here, and sign the waiver for expedited inspection. It clears in 5 minutes." The driver and the foreman stared at me. I grabbed a pen, crossed out the code, wrote the correct one, and initialed the bottom. Try it now, I said. The driver punched the new code into his handheld scanner. It beeped green. Approved. The silence that followed was heavy. I handed the clipboard back and turned to return to my crates, but a cane blocked my path. I looked up to see an older woman standing in the shadows of the warehouse entrance. She wore a nondescript gray trench coat, but her posture was rigid steel. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and terrifying. It was Medora Stone. I recognized her from business journals I used to read in secret. The Iron Lady of Logistics. Retired, supposedly. You have the brain of a shark, Medora said, her voice low and smoky. But you are doing the work of an ant. Why is a girl who knows international tariff codes moving frozen fish for $10 an hour? I just need the money, I muttered, trying to step around her. Excuse me. Elena Sterling, she said. I froze. I don't use that name anymore, I whispered, panic rising in my chest. If you're going to tell the press, just leave me alone. I don't care about the press, Medora said, stepping closer. I care about talent, and I care about leverage. I watched you. You solved a problem in 2 minutes that would have cost this warehouse $5,000 in delays. I have a proposition. I don't want your charity, I snapped, my pride flaring up despite my exhaustion. I can take care of myself. Medora chuckled dryly. She reached into her coat and pulled out a manila envelope. She slapped it against my chest. Charity, no. This is a reality check, she said. Open it. My hands trembled as I undid the clasp. Inside was a credit report and a loan agreement. My eyes scanned the numbers, and the world tilted on its axis. Borrower, Elena Vance. Amount $4,500,000. Status default imminent. What? What is this? I gasped, looking at the signature at the bottom. It was my name, but the handwriting was flourished, confident. It was my father's handwriting. Your father took out a high-risk bridge loan to cover his quarterly losses 6 months ago. Medora explained cold logic dripping from every word. He used your identity as the guarantor. Since he kicked you out and cut you off, he has stopped making payments on it. When this defaults in 30 days, the creditors won't go after him. They will come for you. You aren't just homeless. Elena, you are walking dead. I dropped the papers into the mud. He did not just exile me. He framed me. He set me up to take the fall for his failures. I can't pay this. I stammered, tears of rage finally spilling over. I have nothing. I know, Medora said, but I can make it go away. I own the debt collection agency that holds this note. I can freeze it. I can give you lawyers. I can teach you how to rip their empire apart brick by brick. What do you want in return? I asked. 1 year, Medora said, holding out a gloved hand. You work for me. You stop being a princess and start being a predator. You give me your brain, and I give you the weapon to kill the Sterling legacy. Do we have a deal? I looked at the warehouse, at the rain falling outside, and then at the damning papers in the mud. The Elena who wanted her parents' love died right there. I took Medora's hand. Her grip was like iron. Teach me, I said. Teach me how to destroy them. Northport was not an office. It was a war zone made of rusted steel and salt spray. Medora threw me into the deep end of her operations, a chaotic logistics hub that the city tried to forget. There were no ergonomic chairs or espresso machines here. There was only the deafening screech of cranes and the smell of diesel that permeated my skin until I could taste it. You think you know shipping because you sat in a boardroom? Medora shouted over the roar of a forklift on my 3rd day. Read this manifest. Tell me why that container is riding low in the water if it is supposed to be carrying textiles. I squinted at the code, my eyes burning from exhaustion. It shouldn't be, I stammered. Textiles are light. If the draft mark is that low, it's heavy machinery, or contraband. Good, she snapped. Now go inspect it. And if you throw up from the smell, Do it over the side. For 3 months, I existed on 4 hours of sleep a night. Medora buried me under mountains of paperwork, maritime law, international trade agreements, and forensic accounting records that went back decades. I learned to read the cryptic language of container codes like poetry. I learned the unwritten laws of the stevedore unions, where respect was currency and a handshake was more binding than a contract. The old Elena, the girl who worried about matching her purse to her shoes, died in that port. One night, frustrated by my long hair getting caught in the wind during a storm inspection, I took a pair of kitchen shears and hacked it off in the bathroom mirror. I traded my polyester suits for steel-toed boots, heavy cargo pants, and a thick waterproof jacket. My skin turned rough and tanned from the wind, and when I looked in the mirror, my eyes were no longer soft. They were hard, calculating, and cold. It was during one of my late-night deep dives into the competitor analysis that I found it. I was cross-referencing shipping logs from the Sterling Group. They are lying. I whispered to the empty room. I ran the numbers again. My father's company was reporting record profits based on shipping volume, but the port logs showed that 30% of their ships were traveling light. They were moving empty containers back and forth across the Pacific to inflate their activity numbers. Phantom shipping, Medora said, leaning over my shoulder, the smell of her clove cigarettes filling the air. He is pumping the stock price before the merger. It is illegal, reckless, and brilliant. Until someone notices. I noticed, I said, a dark smile touching my lips. I did not just hunt them. I built my own stronghold. I launched Project Phoenix. I realized thousands of containers were returning to Asia empty, a massive waste of fuel and space. I struck deals with medical nonprofits to fill those empty legs with cheap medical supplies for developing nations. It cost us almost nothing, but it bought us something money could not: loyalty and political cover. My standing at the port solidified the day a subcontractor named Miller tried to stiff a crew of undocumented loaders out of their weekly pay. I walked into the break room where Miller was shouting at a terrified teenager. "Get back to work, or I call ICE," Miller yelled. I slammed a heavy ledger onto the metal table. The room went silent. "You pay them," I said, my voice steady and low. "Every cent, with overtime." Miller sneered at me. "Or what, sweetheart?" "You gonna tell Medora?" "No," I said, stepping into his personal space until he flinched. "I am going to audit your fuel surcharges for the last 6 months. I know you are skimming off the top. Miller, you pay them right now, or I hand your file to the IRS by 5 o'clock. Miller paled. He pulled out his wallet. The workers looked at me with a new expression. It was not just surprise, it was respect. From that day on, I was not just the boss's protege. I was one of them. But the world outside Northport kept spinning. Just as I was finalizing a shipment of vaccines, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Isabella Sterling and fiancé Carter host white party on super yacht. I tapped the location. They were docked at the Golden Marina, less than 3 miles from my filthy, oil-stained office. They were celebrating their stolen life right in my backyard. I looked out the window at the gray, churning water. "Enjoy the champagne, Isabella," I murmured, my hand tightening around my radio. Because the storm is coming. The peaceful rhythm of the port, usually a symphony of grinding gears and shouting voices, was shattered by the obnoxious roar of high-performance engines. I looked down from the catwalk of the gantry crane to see a caravan of neon-colored sports cars swerving through the main gate, ignoring the security guard who was frantically waving his arms. They parked right in the middle of the loading zone, blocking the path of 3 semi-trucks. It was Isabella, Carter, and their entourage of trust fund influencers. They hopped out, phones already raised on gimbal stabilizers, using my workplace as a gritty aesthetic backdrop for their charity awareness live stream. I adjusted my hard hat and descended the metal stairs. I could hear Isabella's shrill voice echoing off the shipping containers. "Hey guys, we are down here at the spooky docks to show support for the, Working class, Isabella chirped into her camera, blowing a kiss. Then she saw me. Her eyes widened and a cruel grin spread across her face. She rushed over, shoving the camera lens into my face. Oh my God. Guys, look, it's my sister Elena. She laughed, a sound that grated on my nerves like sandpaper. I thought you moved to Europe. But look at you. You are literally a dock worker. That is so tragic. Do you need $5 for a sandwich? Carter snickered behind her, leaning against his bright yellow convertible. Careful, Bella. She might get grease on your dress. I did not flinch. I did not hide. I stared directly into the lens, my face smeared with oil, my expression unreadable. I grabbed the walkie-talkie clipped to my chest. Control. This is Vance, I said calmly, my voice amplified by the port's loudspeaker system. We have an unauthorized vehicle blocking active lane 4. It is a safety violation. Remove it immediately. Copy that. Boss, the crane operator replied. Before Isabella could process what was happening, the massive magnetic claw of the overhead crane descended. With a metallic thud, it locked onto the roof of Carter's yellow sports car. The engine whined as the crane hoisted the luxury vehicle 50 feet into the air, dangling it precariously over the harbor water. No, Carter screamed, his face turning purple. Put it down. That is a $200,000 car. He lunged at me, his fist raised. You witch, I will kill you. He never reached me. Before he could take 2 steps, a wall of human muscle formed between us. Miller and 5 other burly stevedores stepped forward, crossing their thick arms. They glared at Carter with a menace that made the pampered heir stumble backward in fear. I wouldn't do that if I were you, rich boy, Miller growled. Miss Vance is protected property around here. Isabella was still filming, her mouth agape, but the comments on her screen were scrolling so fast they were a blur. I stepped past her bodyguards and looked straight into her phone camera. Film this, Isabella, I said, my voice cutting through the wind. You come here to mock us people, here work 18-hour shifts so you can buy your toys. Your money is fake. It is just numbers on a screen. But that container of medicine I am shipping to a field hospital that is real. Now, get off my dock before I have your car crushed into a cube. The video cut there, but the damage was done. By evening, the clip had 5 million views. But the narrative was not what Isabella expected. The comments were not mocking me. They were roasting the Sterling family. Who is the sister? She is a boss. Where did the Sterlings get their money anyway? I sat in my office watching the view count climb. Medora entered, slamming the door behind her. She did not look pleased. You feel good, she asked sharply. You got your moment of glory, but you just poked the hornet's nest. They were ignoring you because they thought you were nothing. Now they will try to kill your project just to spite you. Let them try, I said, though my hands were shaking slightly under the desk. They won't just try. Elena, they will play dirty, Medora warned, blowing smoke at the ceiling. As she left, my computer chimed with a notification. It was a secure email from an anonymous sender. No subject line, just a single sentence that made my blood run cold. Check shipment number 7789. It does not contain electronics. The blue light of the monitors was the only illumination in Medora's private server room. The hum of the cooling fans provided a steady rhythm to our investigation. We were hunting a ghost. Shipment 7789 had vanished from the public tracking logs, but Medora had backdoor access to the satellite transponders used by the insurance underwriters. Got it, I whispered, my fingers flying across the keyboard. It is currently traversing the Strait of Malacca. Declared cargo is high-end precision circuit boards. Destination is a recycling facility in Vietnam. Medora leaned in, her eyes narrowing behind her reading glasses. Pull up the spectral density scan from the departure port. If those are circuit boards, the container should weigh 4 tons. What is the actual weight? I cross-referenced the load sensors from the crane that lifted it. The number on the screen made my stomach drop. 18 tons, I said. That is not electronics. That is lead, cadmium, mercury. E-waste, Medora concluded, her voice devoid of surprise. They aren't manufacturing tech. They are smuggling toxic refuse out of the United States to dump it in illegal landfills abroad. It is cheaper than processing it legally. I felt a cold sweat break out on my neck. I began connecting the dots, pulling up the financial structure of the Sterling Trust, the same trust my parents had gifted Isabella with such fanfare. I overlaid the trust's assets with the liability clauses of the shipping contracts. The puzzle pieces snapped into place with a terrifying click. "The $55 million, I said, my voice shaking. "It isn't a gift. It is an insurance policy." "Precisely," Medora said. "International crime syndicates require collateral when they move dirty cargo. If the ship gets seized, they lose the product. The Sterling Trust is the liquidity backing the operation. And look at the signatory line for the shell company chartering the ship." I zoomed in on the document. There, in elegant, looping cursive, was the signature Isabella Sterling. "She thinks she is running a green energy subsidiary," I said, staring at my sister's name. "But she is the sole proprietor of a criminal enterprise. If that ship is stopped, or if it sinks, the authorities won't come for Mom and Dad. They will come for Isabella. She is the legal owner of the poison." I felt a wave of nausea. My parents had not just disinherited me, they had thrown Isabella to the wolves. They had set her up as the fall guy for a federal crime to protect their own skins. "Wait," I said, noticing a timestamp on an archived file from 2 weeks before my expulsion. "Open that previous draft." Medora clicked the file. It was the original incorporation document for the shell company. I stared at the bottom of the page. The signature was Elena Vance, but I had never signed it. "That is a forgery," I gasped, tracing the screen with my finger. That is my signature from my college loan applications. They copied it. They were going to do this to me. They were going to give me the $55 million and the prison sentence. But they panicked, Medora reasoned. Perhaps the creditors for the other loan were getting too close, or they needed to move the shipment faster than planned. So they kicked you out and pivoted to the spare air. I sat back in the chair, the silence of the room deafening. My parents were not just bad business people, they were sociopaths. Medora reached into her drawer and pulled out a thick file folder, the original debt agreement my father had taken out in my name, the one she had used to recruit me. She slid it across the metal desk. "You have everything you need," Medora said softly. "We can call the FBI right now. They will arrest everyone by morning." I looked at the file, then at the screen where Isabella's digital footprint was leading her straight off a cliff. If I called the police now, lawyers would get involved. Deals would be cut. My parents might wiggle out, blaming it all on a rogue employee or even Isabella herself. "No," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "No police yet, not until the trap is inescapable." "What are you going to do?" Medora asked. "I am going to sue them," I said, a cold plan forming in my mind. "A small, petty lawsuit. I will poke the beast. I will make them think I am desperate for cash. I need them to move money around. I need to trace the flow from their personal accounts to this illegal operation. I want to catch them with their hands on the smoking gun." I stood up, clutching the evidence of my father's fraud. "They wanted to sell me for $55 million, I said. "Now I am going to make sure that money costs them everything." I did not fire a cannon at the Sterling Empire. I fired a quiet dart. I filed a small claims civil lawsuit for breach of implied employment contract and unpaid consulting fees. The amount I demanded was laughable to people like my parents. $200,000. It was the kind of money my mother spent on floral arrangements for a single gala. The strategy was simple. If I had sued for millions, they would have unleashed an army of lawyers to bury me for years. But $200,000, that was a nuisance. It was a parking ticket. And with the merger of the Sterling Group pending in 3 days, they could not afford even a whisper of a lawsuit, no matter how small, appearing in the due diligence reports. They needed me gone, and they needed it done fast. The mediation took place in a glass-walled conference room in downtown Seattle. I wore my oldest sweater, one with a visible hole near the cuff. I stopped washing my hair 2 days prior to ensure it looked limp and greasy. I needed to look like exactly what they thought I was, a failure. Richard and Victoria sat opposite me. They did not even look angry. They looked bored. Richard checked his watch every 30 seconds. "This is embarrassing, Elena," my mother said, smoothing her skirt. "You are dragging us into a legal room for what grocery money? Have you really fallen this low?" I kept my head down, staring at my hands. I made sure my voice trembled when I spoke. I just have debts. Mom," I whispered, forcing a tear to pool in my eye. "The rent is overdue. I don't know what else to do. If you just pay me for the time I worked, I will sign anything. I will disappear." Richard scoffed, a short, sharp sound of disgust. "Pathetic. You have no pride left." "Just, please," I begged, shrinking back into my chair. "I need the money." The corporate lawyer slid a thick document across the table. It was a non-disclosure agreement, stricter than anything I had ever seen. It barred me from ever speaking about the family, the company, or the settlement. "Sign it," Richard commanded, "and we will cut the check." I picked up the pen. My hand shook, partly from performance, partly from adrenaline. I signed my name. Richard did not reach for the standard Sterling Group checkbook. That would have required accounting records. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a slim, black checkbook. I held my breath. I knew he would do this. To keep this payment off the official company books so the auditors for the merger would not see it, he had to use his personal discretionary fund. The secret one. He scribbled the amount $200,000 and ripped the check out with a violent motion. He flicked it across the table like he was tipping a waiter he despised. "Take it," Richard sneered, "and if I ever see your face again, I will have you arrested for harassment." I took the check. "Thank you." "Daddy." I walked out of the building with my shoulders slumped until I turned the corner. Then, I straightened my spine and ran to Medora's waiting car. "Did he bite?" Medora asked. I handed her the check. He bit. "We did not cash it. We did not need the money. We needed the routing number and the account number at the bottom of that slip of paper." Medora scanned it into her tracking software. "Got you?" Medora said, watching the data stream on her laptop. "This isn't a standard bank." "It is the Cayman Shadow Reserve. It is an unregulated bank used almost exclusively for washing cartel money." We watched the digital trail illuminate the screen. The account Richard had used to pay me was the same account receiving the kickbacks from the toxic waste dumping. It proved a direct link. He was not just a negligent CEO unaware of his subordinates' actions. He was the architect. He was moving the money himself. "He just handed us the murder weapon with his fingerprints on it," I said, looking at the signature on the check. While we were sealing their fate, my phone pinged with an Instagram notification. It was Isabella. She had posted a selfie, holding up a diamond necklace that looked heavy enough to bruise her collarbone. The caption read, "Treating myself because I deserve it. Heiress life blessed." She was smiling that perfect, ignorant smile. She did not know that the $200,000 check in my hand was likely the last drop of water from a well that had just run dry. She was wearing a diamond noose, and I was about to kick the chair away. The grand opening of the Phoenix Distribution Center was less than 12 hours away. The warehouse, once a hollow shell of rusted iron, was now a state-of-the-art facility filled with medical supplies destined for Tanzania. We had invited the mayor, 3 senators, and every major news outlet in Seattle to the ceremony. It was supposed to be my moment of triumph, the undeniable proof that I was more than the discarded daughter of the Sterling dynasty. But the air inside the warehouse felt heavy, charged with the static of an approaching storm. Medora walked out of the makeshift command center, her face pale under the harsh halogen lights. She held up her tablet. "We have a leak," she said, her voice tight. "A junior IT analyst at the Sterling headquarters just tried to bypass our firewall. He traced the data packet from the bank inquiry back to this IP address. Richard knows. He knows you have the financial records." My stomach churned. A cornered animal is the most dangerous kind, and Richard Sterling had just realized he was trapped. "He won't sue," I said, looking at the rows of pallets. "He doesn't have time for court. He will try to stop this opening." We did not have to wait long. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the heavy rain outside masked the sound of tires screeching on the wet pavement. I stood on the metal catwalk, watching the shadows move near the loading bay doors. 3 men in dark hoodies pried the lock open with a crowbar. They slipped inside, carrying red gasoline canisters. They were not here to steal. They were here to burn Project Phoenix to the ground. I waited until they were in the center of the floor. Then I spoke into my radio. "Now." The overhead floodlights snapped on with a blinding flash. The intruders froze, shielding their eyes. Simultaneously, the side doors rolled up with a thunderous clatter. Miller and 20 of the toughest stevedores from the local union stepped out, forming an impenetrable wall of muscle and anger. They held wrenches and pipes, their faces set in stone. The intruders dropped the gas cans. The smell of fear replaced the smell of gasoline. Miller grabbed the leader by the collar of his jacket and slammed him against a forklift. "Who pays you to burn down a charity warehouse?" Miller roared. "Speak!" The man shook violently, his eyes darting around the room looking for an escape that did not exist. It wasn't the old man," the thug stammered, gasping for air. It was the other one, the fiancé Carter. He said it was the only way to protect his investment. Carter. He was not just a trophy husband. He was a desperate gambler trying to protect his bet. Before I could process the confession, Medora ran onto the floor, waving her phone frantically. "Elena, we have a situation," she shouted. "The shipment. The ghost ship with the e-waste. It just sent a distress signal." I jumped down from the catwalk and ran to her. The screen showed a weather map of the South China Sea. A massive typhoon was swirling directly over the tracker for shipment 7789. "The hull is breached," Medora said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The captain says they are listing 20 degrees. If that ship goes down, 18 tons of mercury and lead go into the ocean. It will be an ecological catastrophe." My phone buzzed. It was an alert from the banking software we were monitoring. A massive transaction was pending from the Sterling Trust account, Isabella's account. $3 million. Destination a corrupt maritime official in Jakarta. "They are trying to bribe the Coast Guard to tow it to a private cove and hide the wreckage if it sinks," I realized, staring at the screen. They are going to use Isabella's money to cover up an environmental disaster. Time seemed to slow down. I looked at the trembling thugs, the loyal workers, and the digital evidence of my family's final desperate crime. If I waited, the ship might sink and the evidence would wash away, or they might succeed in buying silence. "I can't wait for the opening," I said, my heart pounding against my ribs. "We have to stop them now." "Are you sure?" Medora asked. "Once you send this, there is no going back. You destroy them completely." I thought of Isabella's laughing face on the live stream. I thought of my father's cold eyes when he threw me out. I thought of the poison in those containers. "They destroyed themselves," I said. "I'm just signing the death certificate." I opened the secure portal for the FBI's Financial Crimes Division in the U.S., Customs and Border Protection. I attached the forged loan documents, the shell company registry, the tracking data for the toxic ship, and the log of the attempted bribe happening in real time. My finger hovered over the enter key. "Goodbye, Dad," I whispered. I pressed the button. Sent. The morning sun flooded the Phoenix distribution center, illuminating the clean, white floors and the rows of pallets stacked high with life-saving antibiotics. The air smelled of fresh paint and optimism. It was the perfect picture of success, a stark, blinding contrast to the nightmare unfolding 10 miles away at the Sterling Group headquarters. At exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, just as I was cutting the red ribbon to the applause of the city's mayor, a convoy of black SUVs screeched to a halt outside my father's glass tower. Federal agents did not knock. They swarmed the lobby, seizing servers, files, and terrified executives half a world away. The damaged ship, cargo number 7789, did not sink. It was intercepted by the Coast Guard just as it limped into a safe harbor. They cracked open the containers and found the truth: 18 tons of leaking batteries and crushed monitors, dripping toxic sludge onto the deck. The news broke instantly, interrupting the broadcast of my own opening ceremony. The headlines screamed across the giant monitors we had set up for the presentation. Sterling family accused of international toxic waste smuggling. $55 million trust fund linked to money laundering scheme. The room went silent. All eyes turned to the screens. Isabella was at a high-end fashion gala in downtown Seattle, blissfully unaware. She was holding her phone up, live streaming to her 2 million followers. On the giant screen in my warehouse, I watched the feed in real time. "Guys, the lighting here is just immaculate," Isabella cooed into her phone, posing with a glass of champagne. "We are celebrating the launch of—" "Wait, who are you?" The camera shook as 2 uniformed officers stepped into the frame. "Isabella Sterling," the officer asked, his voice cutting through the ambient music. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to traffic hazardous materials and money laundering. Put your hands behind your back." "What? No." "You can't touch me," Isabella shrieked, the phone tumbling from her hand but landing face up, still broadcasting. The angle was crooked, capturing her terrified face as they snapped the handcuffs on her wrists. I didn't do anything, Daddy. Call my dad. This is a mistake." The feed cut to black. I stood in the center of my warehouse, surrounded by clapping politicians who were now whispering frantically to their aides. I looked at the black screen. I expected to feel a rush of dopamine. I expected to feel the sweet heat of vengeance. Instead, I felt a hollow, cold wind blow through my chest. It was not joy. It was the heavy, suffocating weight of inevitability. They had built their castle on sand, and I had simply kicked away the support beam. Medora walked up to me, holding a tablet. Her face was grim. "They are finished," she said quietly. "The DOJ just froze everything. The bank accounts, the offshore holdings, the stock portfolio. The mansion has been seized as a crime scene. They are sealing the doors as we speak." "And my parents?" I asked, my voice flat. "Slippery," Medora muttered, tapping the screen. Their lawyers managed to argue that they were not the direct signatories on the shipping manifest. Only Isabella signed the documents. Richard and Victoria avoided immediate arrest on a technicality, but they have been evicted. Their credit cards are dead. They are on the street. I looked at the crowd dispersing, the celebration ruined by the scandal, but I did not care. My eyes went back to the frozen image of my sister being dragged away. "And Carter?" I asked. Isabella kept screaming for him in the video. Medora let out a dark, humorless laugh. "Carter, he was on a flight to the Cayman Islands the moment the first news alert hit. He cleaned out his joint account with Isabella and ran. He left her to face the charges alone." I closed my eyes. My sister, the Golden Princess, was sitting in a holding cell, bankrupt and abandoned, facing 20 years in federal prison for a crime our parents engineered. She was the shield they had used to protect themselves, and now the shield was shattered. "It is over," I whispered. "Not yet," Medora said, pointing to the exit. "The story is out, but the authors are still trying to rewrite the ending. We need to make sure the ink dries. The visiting room at the Federal Detention Center smelled of industrial bleach and stale fear. It was a cold, fluorescent purgatory that stripped away every ounce of humanity. I sat on one side of the thick plexiglass divider, my hands folded calmly on the steel counter. On the other side, the door buzzed open and a guard led Isabella in. She looked like a ghost. Her hair, usually a glossy mane of extensions and professional blowouts, hung in greasy, tangled strings around her face. She wore an oversized orange jumpsuit that swallowed her frame. Her eyes were red and swollen, rimmed with dark circles that no amount of concealer could hide, even if she had any. She sat down, picking up the receiver with trembling hands. You did this, Isabella screamed the moment the phone touched her ear, her voice cracking with hysteria. You jealous, hateful bitch. You destroyed our family. Mom and Dad are on the street because of you. I am in here because of you. I picked up my receiver slowly. I did not raise my voice. You are in there because you signed a document you did not read, Isabella, I said softly. You are in there because Mom and Dad needed a scapegoat. Liar, she sobbed, slamming her fist against the glass. They love me. They gave me the trust fund. You were just mad they didn't give it to you. I reached into my bag and held up a document against the glass. It was the original draft of the Shell Company Incorporation, the one with my forged signature. Then I held up the time-stamped emails between Richard and the cartel, explicitly discussing the transfer of liability to Isabella. Look at the dates. Isabella, I said. They tried to frame me first. When I left, they needed a new dummy. That was you. The $55 million was never a gift. It was a bribe for taking the fall. Isabella stopped screaming. She stared at the papers, her eyes darting back and forth. Her breathing became shallow and ragged. No, that's not, she stammered, tears of rage and confusion streaming down her face. Daddy said. He said it was for my future. It was for his future, I corrected her. And do you know why you are looking at 2 years of probation instead of 20 years for international trafficking? She looked at me, confusion warring with her grief. Because I gave your lawyer the video, I said. The live stream you made mocking me. It proved you were at the party while the ship was being loaded. It proved you were incompetent, not malicious. I proved you were too stupid to be the mastermind. Isabella, I saved you. Isabella dropped the receiver. She slumped forward, her forehead resting against the cold glass. Her shoulders shook violently. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The sister she had ridiculed had saved her life. The parents she worshipped had sold her to save themselves. I stood up. I did not feel triumph. I felt a profound sense of waste. Goodbye, Isabella, I whispered, placing the receiver back on the hook. I walked out into the gray Seattle afternoon. The rain had started again, a relentless downpour that blurred the city skyline. By the time I reached the Phoenix Logistics Complex, the sky was pitch black. I went up to my office on the 4th floor, a glass cube that overlooked the main entrance. My phone had been ringing nonstop for 3 hours. Unknown numbers, blocked IDs. I knew who it was. They are at the gate, Medora said, standing behind me. I looked down, under the harsh glare of the security streetlights. 2 figures stood by the iron gates. They were soaked to the bone. Richard was wearing a trench coat that looked ruined by the water, and Victoria was clutching a handbag, her hair plastered to her skull. They were arguing with the night guard, their gestures frantic and pathetic. They looked small. They looked exactly like I had looked 11 months ago. They are asking for a bridge loan, Medora said, reading a text from the security chief. They say they need cash to get to a non-extradition country. They say they are family. I watched them. My father, who had once commanded rooms with a whisper, was now shouting at a minimum wage guard in the rain. My mother, who would not be caught dead in last season's fashion, was shivering in the mud. "Do you want to go down there?" Medora asked. "Do you want to hear them beg?" I watched the rain wash over them, cleansing the last remnants of my childhood anger. "No," I said, turning away from the window. "Not necessary." The elevator doors slid open, revealing the main hall of the Phoenix Distribution Center. Warm, golden light flooded the space, a stark contrast to the cold, gray misery awaiting outside. The air was thick with the smell of roasted barbecue and the sound of laughter. My workers, the stevedores, the crane operators, and the administrative staff were raising glasses, celebrating a victory they had built with their own calloused hands. I smoothed the lapel of my tailored suit, not the cheap polyester I wore a year ago, but high-quality wool that fit like armor. I walked past the celebration toward the main entrance. Miller saw me and signaled the security team. The music faded into the background as I approached the heavy steel gates. "Open it," I ordered. The gears ground together, and the massive gates slowly parted. The storm outside was raging. Rain lashed against the pavement in sheets. Standing there, soaked and shivering, were Richard and Victoria Sterling. They looked like drowned rats. Richard lunged forward the moment he saw me, his eyes wild with desperation. He tried to summon the ghost of his former authority. "Elena, open this gate fully," he shouted, his voice cracking against the wind. "We need inside. Now, the authorities are—" "They are looking for us. You have to hide us. We are your parents." "Elena," Victoria wailed, clutching the wet iron bars. "Please. We have nowhere else to go. You cannot leave us out here. Blood is thicker than water. Remember, I stood just inside the dry overhang, perfectly still. I looked at the man who had thrown my suitcase into the mud. I looked at the woman who had called me an embarrassment." "You are right," I said, my voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "You gave me a very valuable lesson that night. You taught me about logistics. You taught me that when a piece of cargo is damaged beyond repair, you do not keep it. You do not store it. You jettison it to save the rest of the ship." Richard's face went pale. He heard it before I pointed. In the distance, the wailing siren of police cruisers grew louder, cutting through the storm. You didn't," he whispered, backing away. "Elena, tell me you didn't call them." "I told them exactly where to find the fugitives," I said calmly. I reached into my pocket. My fingers brushed against the texture of a crumpled old bill. I pulled it out. It was the same $50 bill I had counted on the floor of the ferry terminal 11 months ago. I had kept it as a reminder of the night I died and was reborn. I crumpled it into a ball and threw it into the puddle at Richard's feet. "Here is $50, I said. "It is enough for a taxi to the police station if you want to surrender with some dignity. That is the final charity you will ever receive from me." Blue and red lights flashed against the wet pavement as 4 FBI vehicles screeched to a halt behind them. Agents swarmed out, weapons drawn. Richard Sterling, Victoria, Sterling hands in the air. My parents screamed. Richard tried to run, slipping in the mud, while Victoria reached out toward me, her fingers clawing at the empty air. "Elena, help us, Elena. Please." I turned my back on them. "Close it," I said to the guard. The heavy gates began to slide shut. I heard the click of handcuffs and the desperate wailing of 2 people who had lost everything. Then, the metallic thud of the locking mechanism silenced the world outside. The past was gone. I turned back to the warmth of the hall. Medora was waiting for me with 2 glasses of champagne. She looked at the closed gate, then at me, a rare smile touching her lips. "Is it done?" she asked. I took the glass. I looked at the people around me, the family I had chosen, the empire I had built from the wreckage. "It is done," I replied. I raised my glass to the room. I was no longer the invisible daughter. I was the queen of the docks. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below sharing your city or country so we can connect. If you enjoyed this journey of justice, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people.